The Transport Molecule. A DMT and Salvia Divinorum trip report by David Artist 987-654-321. Posted at irwood.org June 13th, 2009. This record is an account of my first true breakthrough experience with dimethyltryptamine extracted from Mimosa hostilis root bark, aka Jerema. My first DMT extraction involved shredding 1 kilogram of the root bark in a coffee grinder, which yielded an off-pink purple mulch with fine powder collecting on the bottom. This material was basified to 12 pH using sodium hydroxide from Robic's crystal drain cleaner. Red Devil Eye had been taken off the market, and this was the only available substitute I could find. Robic appears to now be off the market as well. The bark material was allowed to sit in the solution for 10 hours. Afterwards, 5 extractions of non-polar mineral spirits were taken from the bark sodium hydroxide solution. A ratio of 1 to 10 of mineral spirits were added to the bark solution, then shaken vicariously for 5 minutes. The 2 layers of non-polar and polar solvent solutions were left to sit for 30 minutes to separate. After the solution was separated using a turkey baster, it was added to a large glass bowl. All 5 extractions were completed in this same procedure. Each extraction was added together, leaving me with roughly 700 to 800 milliliters of dark yellow liquid. This liquid was then added to a 1-gallon bag, and 3 to 4 times the amount in water was poured into it. The layer of non-polar solvent was then separated from the polar water solvent. A scissor was used to cut a bottom corner of the bag to allow the water layer to drain out. Just as the water finished draining, the bag was immediately placed over another glass bowl so the non-polar solvent could flow into it. This procedure was repeated 4 times to make sure all sodium hydroxide, water-soluble, was removed from the non-polar solvent. The yellow liquid material was then poured into a large glass baking pan and allowed to evaporate. After a week or so, the solvent had completely evaporated, leaving an orange lucent wax substance which, upon scraping up, yielded a light sienna-type tar. Initial trials of smoking this substance resulted in a very painful and unsettling smoke using a glass pipe. 50 milligrams or so created a definite altered state of consciousness, perception, and visual distortion. However, my lung capacity prevented me from smoking any more of this orange-brown material. I still had 4 kilograms of Mimosa hostilis bark sitting in the freezer. After my disappointing extraction results, I dismissed it as a source for crude DMT. I figured the tar may be a great substitute for drinking the foul ayahuasca tea, but was not an acceptable source of smokable DMT. The irony being, after about 1 year, I was cleaning out my freezer and stumbled upon 1 2-kilogram bags of Mimosa hostilis bark and a second bag of finely ground 2-kilogram bark. I had thought about selling it or making several ayahuasca teas, which I've never tried due to certain medications I'm taking. Either way, I figured I'd condense the solution down to something more storage friendly, or at least make a few bucks off of it. I then decided selling year-old mimosa bark isn't fair to the buyer, and decided I'd do the same extraction process I'd tried 1 year prior. I'd gone through the same exact series of extractions using the polar and non-polar separations, which I'd utilised 1 year earlier. However, I chose to evaporate the substance in a different setting. Instead of evaporating outside, I stuck the dishes in a slow ventilation area in the garage. I used 2 baking glass dishes because I had twice the mineral spirit material to work with. I basically left the dishes in those cupboards for about 2 months. I should note that during those 2 months it was the coldest time of the year between December and February. Temperatures in the garage regularly experienced highs of 50 degrees and lows of 30 degrees. I'd actually forgotten about the trays for a month when I went onto an entheogen forum and began looking into tryptamines. This jolted my memory, and I remembered about the trays I had forgotten. That night, I went into the garage and pulled both trays out of the cupboard. To my surprise, I noticed white bumps scattered throughout them. They were such a pure white I almost mistook them for some sort of freak fungal infection. Upon further inspection, I noticed these bumps looked like finely defined crystalline structures. There was still liquid within the dishes, so I poured it into a glass bowl and stuck the remaining solution into the freezer for 48 hours. The white crystals were stuck to the dishes, and there were dozens of them, on average the size of a penny to a quarter. These crystal structures were all circular and seemed to form in separate clumps. I scraped these up and placed them on a glass plate to dry. In the meantime, after 48 hours, I checked on the glass bowl in the freezer. Upon pulling out the bowl, I noticed an immediate fuzzy film all over the sides of the bowl where the non-polar solution was present. It looked exactly like yellow pollen with thousands of tiny yellow balls clinging to the sides of the glass dish. The remaining liquid was poured out, and this material was collected using a razor blade. This soupy, bright yellow material was then placed on a glass dish and allowed to dry. The remaining liquid was placed back into the glass dishes and allowed to evaporate outside under much faster circumstances. What I ended up with were 3 separate grades of DMT. The white crystalline bumps, as I called them, seemed to be very pure DMT. I didn't need a microscope to see the complex arrangements within the material I collected. It turned out to be several grams, which filled 3/4 of a baggie, which most buttons used for clothing accessories are sold within. My theory is the slow evaporation, coupled with the numerous freezing nights, seemed to concentrate the chemicals slowly over time. It gradually precipitated out of the solution and yielded the most pure product possible. The second extract was the yellow powder which was precipitated out of the freezer technique. It was much more consistent in its distribution over the glass bowl. Instead of seeing bumps of DMT, I saw a thin 1/8 inch layer of yellow pollen-type substance coat the entire bowl. This material, I should mention, was partially extracted with xylene. This is supposed to extract uramamine, or jungle DMT. This material was separated in the initial extraction phase to see if this chemical would truly be extracted. I also used mineral spirits with a couple of the pulls. I saw no reddish or other bizarre colorations with the extract, which I've read have been reported. I do believe there is some other alkaloid, possibly with MAOI characteristics, which makes the xylene extract more intense. This yellow substance proved to be a more powerful experience than the pure crystalline bumps I had discovered from the initial solution. The evaporated waxy brown orange material from the third, final extract seems to be residual alkaloids which contain some leftover DMT. I found it way too hard to smoke, and have therefore saved it in the freezer as a possible future ayahuasca analogue. The first dose of DMT I administered was the initial crystalline white substance which I gave to a co-worker. Upon initial feedback, he had stated it was very clean and visual, but would not comment further. This irritated me because I had basically used him as a guinea pig, and these were the only words he could provide on the experience. I've noticed after repeatedly smoking DMT that memory is quite fleeting and absent. It seems as though the brain cannot or does not want to process high doses of this compound. The mind seems to shut down in an attempt to possibly retain any tangible essence of accessible reality. I think the experience itself might be so profound, the brain shuts itself off in order to cope with the effects which are too intense for the normal state of consciousness to bear. It could well be a psychological barrier which the mind upholds in order to tolerate a rapidly disintegrating state of both the ego and the body. I vaguely remember my first experience with the first crystalline white DMT I had smoked. I remember uptaking the compound in around 3 large tokes out of a glass pipe. I would estimate I smoked around 60 milligrams or so of the substance. I held the lighter about 1 inch from the pipe and let it sit for 10 seconds or so. I then inhaled the vapour and repeated this practice 3 times without ever exhaling. I had held the vapour for around 40 seconds over the course of the 3 hits. I could feel the effects after roughly 20 seconds. By the exhalation of the 3rd hit, I was experiencing an incredible glowing vibration which overwhelmed my entire body. It had no reference point, and I felt as though my entire body was an integrated force. The force was emanating from the centre of my brain. I could simultaneously experience every cell within my body which seemed to originate within the top of my mind. Typing this now completely sober, I can feel the pulse of the experience emanating from my brain. Residual memory is my best guess. The imprint of the experience seems to alter the ability to remember it. The only way I can remember the experience is to recount some of its most mild and subdued effects. I think of past life regression of the consciousness. In order to articulate such a bizarre experience into words, my brain must restore itself to that point of origin. Even then, words are completely inadequate. This is what I feel distinguishes DMT from other psychedelics of which I've consumed hundreds, if not thousands of times. When I recall a memory of an acid trip, psilocybin trip, or mescaline trip, they all feel subjective and alienated from my mind. They are nothing more than remnant thoughts, proud but distant from my current conscious state of mind. They are like the alleyway of a distant, exuberant, and fascinating exploration into an inner city complex to which I do not occupy. My mind recounts the memory and experience but keeps it disconnected because it is not integrated into my everyday existence. These psychedelics are but a lone and narrow road which my psyche may pursue every once in a while on a whim. DMT is a far different beast. It is right there in my thoughts, my dreams, my reality. I feel it every second I'm alive as I'm typing this coursing through my veins. It is of me and part of me. I sense it as, and always will be, within me till the day I die and beyond. I only get this experience with the other tryptamines or phenethylamines when I consume them. They feel like a temporary portal into the astral realms of my subconscious. Whenever I think about DMT or even envision its effects on my mind, I enter a sort of binding resonance with reality. Typing this and thinking of this substance, I feel as though it is affecting me now and has always been. It is part of the complex chemical soup of my own pineal gland, per se. When I listen to my body, it tells me what the mind is too hypersensitive to understand emotionally, unless it cuts itself off from primal sensation. The pineal gland is the manufacturing centre for DMT. It occupies the most valuable real estate inside the brain around its centre. My question is, why did we evolve to protect this gland and hold it in the most sacred place within the brain? It occupies the most substantial chakra point, or crown chakra. It is right above the cerebral pineal fluid sac which surrounds the human brain, and this suggests it is in direct proximity to upload information of possible visual and psychic nature into this organ. The ancient Sumerians were aware of this gland, along with the French philosopher Descartes and the Egyptians. Many of the ancient inscriptions and cuneiforms show what looks like a pine cone adorning scepters and other religious and sacred objects. They understood the pinecone pineal gland was the vessel into incredible spiritual revelations and knowledge. Reality, for me, is nothing more than concentrated energy, condensed down to a specific third-dimensional vibration at an extremely slow rate. When I focus hard enough, I feel this vibration. It is most prominent when under altered states of consciousness. Under this mild, focused awareness, I feel what my body truly is and always was. Surprisingly, it feels like a weak DMT trip within a competent and coherent state of mind. A constant vibrational glow within my physical body at probably slightly above my heart rate. This beat probably corresponds with the Schumann frequency. My body beats at the same resonance as the Earth's. I feel this when I'm having deep thoughts about my experiences of DMT under extreme meditation. When I imagine its presence over my psyche, then I begin to feel the greater sense that I am just a beat or pulse within a greater planetary organism. The feeling is so completely organic and fluid, I almost have panic attacks at times, as though my heart is beating rhythmically with a force out of my control. This pales in comparison to the yellow powdered freezer precipitated DMT I smoked. That experience was much more profound and terrifying. The irony being the terror tantalized me, making me titillated and disturbed. The substantial thing is, I remember every single aspect in specific detail. It is more vivid than my most vivid memories of my entire 27 years of life on this planet. My first sexual encounter, my childhood trauma of being lost in Disneyland, California for 12 hours, terrorized by costumed Mickey Mouse and Goofy, and even my first experience waking up from a 2-day coma of GHB overdose, which I recovered from after my vitals flatlined. The experience I had is the most vivid memory I have ever had in my entire life. It is more real than this reality, so pristine in all aspects that I know it was real, not of this dimension, though, within that plane, but of another higher 4-dimensional place. This place was so vivid I know without a doubt I could not have been a hallucination or vision of sorts, unless the very nature of the reality I've spent my entire life is a perpetual hallucination or vision. This current and physical reality feels more synthetic than the chemically intertwined oneness DMT took me into within 5 minutes. In that span of time I entered a plane of space which was so foreign and alien to my existence, it destroyed my faith in the very material existence of this reality. It also had detrimental consequences on my belief in death and birth, which at that time, simultaneously, occurred in the same space. This showed me there is no birth and no death. It is the illusion of this subjective perception of the whole consciousness creating a new memory for itself. Think about any memory you've ever had. It starts and it ends very abruptly after only a matter of seconds. This is the microcosm of a fleeting experience juxtaposed onto the greater movie, which is the story of your life. All we see is the movie in action. We're never aware of what happens before or afterward in this realm. We don't anticipate the planning, the script being written, the actors being cast. We don't foreshadow the credits roll because we simply turn off the TV prior. We don't ask why the set is disassembled, the costumes auctioned off, the copyrights challenged in court. We only see the parts that we want to see. These parts are recorded in a montage fashion over the span and course of our waking reality. That description is the difference between this reality and the reality of DMT. It shows me the past, present and future simultaneously in one conscious state. This is about the simplest way I can articulate what I think this compound does and is capable of on the mind. Transporting consciousness to a state of omnipresence, which our primal brain is simply too preoccupied with the present to assimilate. I don't want to provide the impression that I'm enlightened or endowed with esoteric knowledge the general populace is lacking, because, well, I'm not. I'm a polysubstance abuser, an alcoholic, sufferer from ADHD and chronic depression. I am far, far from enlightened. And that is the magic of DMT. I don't have to be endowed with talents beyond the normal scope of humanity. I don't need to have mastered Ayurvedic or Vedic forms of meditation. I care little for purity or yoga. I tried them, but I simply found I love to endure pain. I've always been attracted to bodybuilding, a great euphemism for life. I destroy my body only to build it up stronger than it was before. I love pain because I feel that through this venture, only there can I grow. The Roman Empire's debauched hedonism has shown the excesses of pleasure leads to spiritual downfall. DMT is a painful experience in very high doses. It, or any other psychedelics, are not meant for most of the population, as Huxley warned. Leary made the mistake of hoping the greater populace would see some relevance to these substances without understanding humanity has an innate and outright detesting of the unknown. DMT is the ultimate unknown, and perhaps understandably the most cautious psychedelic which one should approach. In many respects, I am glad this substance is scheduled, because I do not feel most of humanity is ready to allow their brain to accept an experience so outside of their immediate surroundings. The majority of humanity is simply not ready for this experience. This is why I feel it must be left in the hands of the brave and adventurous beings who are willing to risk their own sanity in order to explore the ultimate unknown, the human brain, or what we would call psychonauts. I prefer Huxley's mentality in that psychedelics should be reserved for a select few, but who decides that curriculum, standard, and access? I believe these few discovered this on their own because something has always driven them to this information. They've always known these entheogens were meant to lead them to something beyond themselves. This is precisely why I'm here typing this information for you to read. The curiosity which has brought you to this information is a testament to your willingness to attempt to understand these alternate realities. The other route is Leary, whose blatant publication of this alternative psychotropic medication helped inhibit psychiatric research of entheogen back by decades. Advocating mass use of such powerful tools is, well, in my opinion, incredibly foolish, and I find premature coming from an MD who was caught up in the wave of popularity he had received from his association with these compounds. His ego destroyed psychedelics in mainstream research. This is why they are chemically designed to destroy the ego, to prevent mass human awareness of their eye-opening properties. From personal observation, most of us are not physiologically hardwired or capable to cope with the changes these substances induce within us. I theorize these plant alkaloid compositions are a deterrent to animals developing higher organized states. In these states, these animals possess greater potential to destroy the plant in question. Keep the animal disoriented and confused, and it will not desire to pass the information to its siblings. Alkaloids are a defense mechanism simultaneously terrifying and expanding reality. To most animals, this would be perceived as a toxin within the brain, with no benefit to their immediate survival. Hence, the plant is saved from being eaten and preserves itself in order to reproduce. Why then do humans consciously consume the toxic plants other animals disregard? The more one advocates and ordains these chemical godheads, the more it fuels the ego. This is most prevalent in Western society, where such chemicals give the distributor a sense of superiority by having access to a divine substance which only a few are granted. This is the trick organized religion has used for thousands of years. Its controllers profess to contain a knowledge and wisdom from an external source, usually God, which gives these priests, bishops, and shamans spiritual control over the population. Yes, primitive shamans are just a prototype of bishops, priests, and disciples which Western society adopted without the heavy cultural indoctrination of psychedelic compounds. Shamans, along with priests and religious leaders, fall into the trap of ego. This is why I feel these plants place a premium on debilitating that aspect of the human mind. The ego is what influences these teachers to withhold the knowledge and hoard it for themselves. They pass it down selectively to only a few who they feel worthy enough to possess it. This is the ego in motion. These elitists are revered and worshipped for this wisdom and held in elevated status. They use these substances to wow their populations. If one wishes to understand this very simply, then ask the question, who benefits? When one asks this question, he, she, will see very clearly who has profited from the circumstances I have described. Priests are the updated shamans of the modern world. They are there to impress their followers with the possibility of access to greater truth and knowledge. In return, they receive money, adoration, and power. As long as they tightly hold on to this knowledge, they have no fear in it reaching the masses. This is the detriment the ego has caused in our culture and its access to higher spiritual truths. These spiritual keepers hold the highest status and prestige of the group they occupy, containing knowledge and insight denied to the general populace. This is, say, akin to the highest degrees of the Freemasons, who have restrained the knowledge of ancient levitation, occult ritual magic, and esoteric wisdom. this wisdom held desperately because the few in power use the many followers' ignorance to glorify and exonerate their status at the expense of their sheep's lack of hindsight. The wolf is always herding his flock inevitably into slaughter. What I personally find interesting about DMT is its ability to completely shatter my sense of ego and any feelings of superiority, be it intellectual or physical, I may think I possess. No other entheogen has done this and told me in ways I don't understand that I am not what I think I am or ever was. Other chemicals may take me into another dimension of reality, but never take me to another reality. This is exactly what is happening to my psyche while on DMT versus other entheogens. They take my ego to another plane where, to the outsider, it seems limited, but is merely bypassed. DMT takes my ego to another place so foreign and alien in nature it ceases to exist in this dimension altogether. Such a shattering event occurs over the course of less than 5 minutes before I'm back within the place from which I left. For reference purposes, I'll describe the only other substances which has created ego death to such a drastic degree as DMT, and it is Salvia divinorum, or Divinus Sage. Personally, I disregard Salvia and have never found any spiritual or transcendent tangible benefit from the several times I've smoked it. It feels alien, similar to DMT but not integrated into my being. It has the same sterility and muteness feeling I get from DMT, but it lacks a sense of the only word I can describe as a soul. Whereas DMT feels cosmic and infinite, Salvia feels personal, internal, and entrapping to my consciousness's point of reference. The intensity and duration of DMT and Salvia are both startlingly similar. Both begin within 20 to 30 seconds, and effects end completely within 15 minutes. Both are profound, and easily the two most intense experiences that I've ever had in my life. They actually seem to replicate the same alien plane of existence, however, the effects are drastically different from one another. At 1 minute into both experiences, I lose complete control over my body. Time has no meaning, or ever did. I could be dead or living and it wouldn't matter because those states of being hold no real effect over the conscious state which my mind is occupying. I believe it is this point my consciousness has left the third-dimensional dense space and accessed a lighter fourth-dimensional realm. Here, anything goes, and nothing in the context of this third-dimensional space holds any relevance. It's gone. There is no physical body, as there is no need for one. Consciousness doesn't seem to need a body. In this state, the body was merely a vessel to experience the consciousness which was always pervasive in all things. This is right where the similarities completely end, though. DMT connects me with an all-encompassing force which is present in all matter within the universe. I am one with the infinite, the cosmic consciousness of a dozen different dimensions which all exist simultaneously. The Salvia experience is most similar to a blackout of my consciousness. I go deep within my most primordial state. My mind is not able to articulate any point of reference to this reality, yet all of my motor skills are fully intact. I know this happens to most people that smoke Salvia because I've watched hundreds of videos of kids trying it on YouTube. About 30 seconds in, I can see the point where these people stop laughing and hit that alternate reality. In this state, they cannot express it, but they are usually terrified, confused, and gripped with emotion which the body cannot and doesn't externally demonstrate to the observer. I believe much of this has to do with setting, as Salvia is often a first and only time occurrence due to the experience it generates. What I find unsettling about Salvia is it seems to take any remnant of whatever consciousness I can make reference of and unzip it. My mind is torn in two separate places as the drug takes it one direction, but my mind wants to go in the other. It's an utter contradiction of planes of my psyche, and I call it the zipper effect. I'm unzipped and splitting apart, being pulled instantly in two separate directions without any control. I wouldn't mind this state of being if I felt as though I somehow benefited from it or utilised it. maybe it's just me, but I can never seem to feel as though this introspective substance is connecting me to anything meaningful or psychologically usable. I believe Salvia and DMT are accessing the same dimensional space. The Salvia taking me to an infinite introspective collapse of the ego and reality where I am self-contained. The DMT taking me to infinite cosmic possibility where I'm integrated into all matter and am all matter within the universe simultaneously. The micro and the macro expressing themselves in different conscious states, yet always of the same source. I think my primitive mammalian brain is more attracted to the DMT because of its constant role in human metabolism and biological function. The brain craves this substance, which interestingly is one of the only to be uptaken so readily by the cerebral pineal fluid of the blood-brain barrier, much more easily than complex carbohydrates or proteins which must be broken down into glucose for the brain to utilise their properties. Salvia is not an alkaloid, and is not as easily recognisable by the human body. This is why I believe I have a dislike of the substance. My brain seems to utilise DMT because it knows through millions of years of evolution how to best incorporate it into my mind and my body. The Salvia is foreign and new, a novelty. Perhaps through the same evolutionary process it too will generate the missing link to the subconscious. I theorise the human brain isn't yet fully integrated within the individuality of conscious thought it occupies to understand the extreme interpersonal plane that Salvia invokes. We are social animals, bound and interconnected with other members of our species. We have never been alone, isolated and ostracised to the point where one can evolve long enough to deprive itself of the collective herd. It is impossible to understand conscious singularity because, as social primates, we will always depend on other animals of the same species in order to survive. This is why I feel Salvia is inaccessible in the current human state. We're not quite ready to leave any and all reference or attachment to the collective consciousness which binds all of us together. We are essentially a Borg mind, 100th monkey effect in full force, and always have been to further the evolution of our species. Our planet is within its current state of disarray, chaos and schizogenesis due to the collective state humanity has created. The DMT is the embodiment of collective consciousness. It destroys my ego, so that I can see the destruction my ego has caused upon myself and others. It is built-in hardware within the human pineal gland, tissue and blood, designed for what I feel is to destroy ego and connect us in a state of being where we are not influenced by crude emotional states, cultural biases and petty selfish gains. This is why I believe the drug is so sterile and neutral in nature. It doesn't sugarcoat things with an amphetamine high like the phenethylamine mescaline, nor does it dilute and denigrate the nervous system, as does the debilitating effects of alcohol. In the end, this stuff is a conduit into God consciousness. The irony being that state has always been here, always was here, always will be here. We are simply too preoccupied with our minuscule and trivial pursuits to acknowledge it. We are the ones we were waiting for. I'm using Salvia here as a reference material because it is far more prevalent and accessible in its current legal state than DMT. More readers than not have probably encountered Salvia, but not DMT. Therefore, I felt the description of its similarity to DMT may familiarise one with what they may possibly expect from DMT in terms of magnitude, duration, and intensity. At this point, I should discuss the breakthrough experience that I had. Well, I have no recollection of the day or time of this event. Those facts feel irrelevant to what I encountered during that brief 10-minute period. I wish I could accurately provide a date and time in order to sequentially document this event more accurately. For myself, the experience is so profound and overwhelming that it is impossible for me to collect my thoughts into a cohesive state shortly after the event had subsided. I need months to process the experience and gather innate data which the DMT is feeding my body. I can feel minimal amounts of DMT activating throughout my body at this very moment. The memory of the intense experience lingers, It never leaves the back of my mind. It doesn't feel proper to attempt to define the most profound experience of my life within hours of when it happened. From a scientific standpoint, this is the most relevant approach to documenting the effects of DMT. From a physiological and psychological standpoint, it's very premature and the experience is shortchanged by the immediate effects versus the longer-standing repercussions. I feel as though I am denying myself and others the full magnitude of the DMT experience by pigeonholing it down to a time and place. This feels irrelevant in the greater scheme of the chemical and its role within the human body. It is always with me and always will be with me. What I chronicle is merely a peak release of this compound which I have coordinated in order for it to direct me to a state of consciousness I need at that time and space. I don't smoke DMT on a whim. It tells my body and my brain when I need to smoke it. I don't feel as though I control when, how, or why I need to smoke an incredibly powerful, disturbing, and outright shattering experience. In fact, most of my very neutral DMT experiences are bordering on unpleasant. The realm I am taken to is so outside of the jurisdiction and imagination of my conscious brain, it is downright terrifying yet complete nirvana at the same simultaneous moment. Such a foreign place is not dared treaded upon without a degree of psychological preparation. This is why Salvia is usually a one-hit wonder for most people. They can't fathom the place, assimilate it, and interpret it with their current conscious state without deep preparation and forewarning. Going from here to there in 20 seconds, it's too much for most people, and they will instinctively resist rather than embrace and let themselves go into this experience. So, anyways, onto the trip, or whatever one wants to call it. It was no trip, mind you. I actually hate that term. Yet, it is so accessible and immediately identifiable, I need to use it to create a reference point. But it was more a journey. A trip is short and ends abruptly in the schism of the relevance of time. A trip could be 1 hour or 20 hours. Every other psychedelic experience I've used is a trip, because of these traits. DMT is not a trip, but a journey. It lasts less than any other entheogen I've ever encountered, but takes me to a place through a cosmic forest of thoughts and ideas over the longest duration I can fathom. I go to a timeless place without any reference to any time or physical sensation. I don't exist. I am merely consciousness expressing itself in the most primal state identifiable by the brain's ability to detect it. What I recall is the recollection of a meaningless night, time, and place. It is to the best of my memory and ability the account of the DMT experience I had that night. The settings were familiar and felt completely reassuring within my surroundings. There was no sense of fear or hesitation within this chemical being which I was about to envelop, and I loaded around 60 to 80 milligrams of the yellowish DMT extract which was partially obtained using xylene. I've heard this substance extracts a form of DMT which is very negative in nature. I don't feel that sense. It has more to do with the situation, setting and expectations and the actual chemical makeup which is simply a byproduct of the experience itself as a precursor which is only realised after the entire experience has occurred. After the substance was loaded into the glass pipe, I took a blowtorch and held it roughly 2 inches away from the glass pipe. I lit the flame, then slowly let the spiralling smoke swirl around within the glass pipe. I used my index finger to close off the top chamber hole to allow the smoke to concentrate. After around 30 seconds I began to slowly inhale the substance into my lungs. During this entire time the lighter was continually burning and the substance was continually vaporizing into smoke. Within one long 30-second hit I managed to consume the entire amount of DMT. It was held in my lungs for another 30 seconds or so before I exhaled. Before I let the chemical out of my lungs, I began to feel the effects. An immediate sense of disorientation clouded my conscious state, and I was instantly inundated with thoughts of panic and anxiety. This feeling seemed to be a natural response to the profound changes which were rapidly organising within my peripheral view. Before I could think another thought, my brain was blasted with intense clarity. Rich reds and warm spectrum colours exploded into my view. I saw all matter as nothing more than an atomic reddish field of wild vibration, which was pulsing within everything that my eyes could absorb. Reality was a vibrating pulsation of bead-type atoms, almost like the static on a channel-less television screen. I saw everything for what it truly was. Everything in matter became nothing more than a pulsing vibration collection of trillions of circles making up this reality. Reality became an illusion, as though my body felt distance from any reference to it. Reality was just a pulse within the cosmic vibration of the infinite cosmic consciousness. I was that cosmic consciousness, and it began to dissolve my physical body and ego simultaneously. I felt the dissolution from my body was necessary to provide my consciousness with the capacity to enter hyperdimensional space. I was beginning to lose the ability to control my arms and legs. They felt like silly putty as they squirmed around like an octopus recoiling while trying to reassure itself that it still possessed the instinctual ability to move. An immediate detachment of my body was stirring within my mind. It wanted to keep itself aligned with anything with which it could recognize, but it could not. I wanted to stay in the locality within my physical body. When I say I, what I mean is the consciousness that expresses itself within my body. Leaving this hive consciousness, which my brain had been so accustomed to, was frightening. At this point, I was catapulted out of this reality and dimensional plane. There was a simultaneous blackout which probably lasted more than a split second in real time. It felt as though it had occurred over several minutes. The events above happened over what I would guess were 30 seconds to 1 minute. Immediately, I was now in a new hive mind which felt more real than anything I've ever felt in this reality. My vocabulary and articulation are obviously severely lacking to accurately describe the next transpiring of events. I cannot verbalize it using any vocabulary known to man. No word can provide or define what I went through. I will say though that it was the most real experience I've ever had in my entire 27 years of conscious thought. The reason being, none of it was verbal. Everything was visual. All communication visual. All thought visual. Everything was visual, as it felt to be the most efficient and least misinterpreted means of experience and communication in this very place. I now know why millions of people have extraterrestrial abductions. I know for a fact many of these people are having these abductions. The thing is, their body never leaves this reality in order to have those experiences. Their consciousness is being absorbed by extra-dimensional beings. Now, I must say, I'm not talking Terence McKenna style jeweled elves bumping around squeamishly. The beings that I contacted were far more earnest, sterile, and objective. To such a degree, they are the embodiment of science in its physical manifestation of laws, discourse, control, and theoretical ideology. I was a lab rat on a silver, luminous table observed by these completely neutral beings. Basically, I had been transported from my physical third-dimensional body and simultaneously placed into a bizarre, fourth-dimensional headspace. I had no body in this realm. I was an etheric being lying down on a table. My body was a translucent, as if a form of penetrating light per se, through the skin, displaying every skeletal structure, blood vessel, and cell within my body. This was all light, illuminating itself, and manifesting into what my detached brain must have generated as a holographic human body. My brain was still there. It was simply connected to another place through the DMT molecule. This connection of an unidentifiable alien state is the source for such confusion, which my brain could not clarify into anything remotely recognizable. I specifically remember these three beings as though I was looking at them before this computer screen. It is as if they are a part of me, a part I don't understand or can connect with because, well, they occupy a place I cannot normally feel, see, or detect. I felt so trapped at this point. How on earth are these beings here around me and everyone else, and nobody has any sense of their presence besides me? What I'm guessing is these beings are operating on a different frequency than our own. We've got hundreds of radio stations penetrating the sky, but only hear one station at a time. DMT is like an antenna, which attracts other dimensions and draws them to this one, thus allowing the individual to access and tune in to these frequencies, which were otherwise scrambled and not able to be processed by the brain. These beings spoke to me telepathically. When I state telepathic, I mean whatever they wanted me to know, they gave it to me. It wasn't like a beam or thought within the mind. I simply knew what they wanted me to know without seeing or thinking anything. It was an emotional state in which I could feel what they wanted to tell me. Through their instant transmission, I knew exactly what they wanted and required of me. It was so much more efficient and straightforward than verbal communication. Feeling evoked immediate internal communication and knowledge. I simultaneously knew what, who, and why they and I were there. They directed thoughts through feelings into my mind, which I would immediately recognize. This didn't require any philosophical or intellectual decoding or interpretation. I simply knew exactly what they were thinking because they could somehow transfer their intentions through imagery which I couldn't see, but directly felt. I remember exactly to the very finest detail what these beings looked like in physicality. The environment itself felt like something straight out of Ridley Scott's Alien. There was a bizarre static type environment with predominant browns, blacks, and greys. It felt very organic with interconnecting insectoid coils and worm-like tubing network lining the walls and background. It seemed to be a ship or interstellar vessel. I was in a circular room which was occupied by three beings, which were standing in front of me. They were overlooking my etheric body, which was laid upright onto a silver elongated slab. These entities were very skinny. Their body I recall vaguely because I was too preoccupied with their face. It was blackish, as if they were wearing a black jumpsuit, all-encompassing, covering themselves. The face was the most disturbing aspect. All three had this grey metallic face to them. They were nothing like the Zeta Reticulan alien greys with large black almond eyes many people describe, although I could see how the two entities could be mistaken by a person in such a frightened state. Their face was smooth, grey and metallic. They had no eyes, ears or mouth. The face was one complete solid vessel. I felt as though it was a mask of some type. It was as if they were using a certain costume and mask in which I could identify while denying their true nature from my vision. Their metallic mask had subtle features imprinted within it. There were what appeared residual elements of a stubby nose, the inlay of what once was eyes, and small slits which resembled babies' lips. I felt as though these beings had evolved so drastically they no longer had any need for the five senses. They no longer needed eyes, ears, lips, etc. to express themselves. They were expression personified in my own thought of what I visualized they were physically. Everything they did or said was by vibration and emotion, in the only way I could seem to understand it. They were the Greys as many people have described, but they were not aliens and they were not insectoid. These elements were simply infused into the environment which gave the impression that these beings possessed those traits. These beings were me, in a different space, in a different dimension. The alien nature of the circumstances initially prevented me from realizing this. I felt as though I was from one radio station and they from another. The DMT, therefore, must be the antenna connecting different aspects of the same consciousness. These stations can communicate by crossing paths and sharing data from different dimensional frequencies. This may sound delusional, but this reality we live in, well, this is the true delusion. The Matrix is real, but our bodies are being used as a vessel to experience third-dimensional space. This third-dimensional information is then uploaded by other dimensional beings who cannot experience this one. Now, I only know this because the DMT told me and quite blatantly showed me how this process works. Before my very own trips of DMT, I would have thought this information was coming from a psychotic schizophrenic. I now know better. I remember what they had constantly expressed almost a dozen times over the course of the consolidation process. I say consolidation because these beings were me in another dimension. I cannot express this point more clearly. They cared not for how I got there or why I was there. So they simply knew I was coming and anticipated my arrival. It is as if they were a more advanced part of myself, which I was completely ignorant of knowing. I was them, and they were me. I was like the reptilian brain that they were studying from the distant recesses of their own. They, themselves, even though they are me, in a higher sense, were like the more evolved neocortex attempting to understand the lizard brain. I believe this alternative realm feels very reptilian and insectoid in nature. It feels this way because we are accessing a dimension which displays the information these beings wish to take from us. They appear this way, look this way, and behave in this way. They need to acquire this reptilian form in order to access the information they take from our psyche. They are visible as a mirror reflection of what they are seeking, just as I am accessing a mirror reflection of the higher dimensional state which I am seeking. This knowledge transfer feels like the way in which they can de-evolve to become like me, and I can evolve to become like them. It is as if they and I are both assimilating and experiencing a distant past and future of ourselves simultaneously in order to better integrate the two. They and I both wanted to have a mutual exchange. I felt as though the trauma I experienced was far less severe than what they had. I believe this is why so many people have negative extraterrestrial experiences. They feel as though these beings are taking something from them and not returning it. I believe this is true to an extent. When I was sitting in that chair, these beings downloaded me. When you think about it, the Matrix is completely real, only much more etheric and less mechanized than Hollywood would have you believe. These three beings downloaded me, took my consciousness, and Xeroxed it, storing it into an essence with which I felt they could somehow benefit from this information in the future. They copied my life memories, experiences, and dreams, then stored this information in order to get high from it, and experience it much like I utilize DMT to get high. It's so bizarre, yet so true. My memories are a portal gateway from which DMT transmits them to these beings. They then utilize these fragments into knowledge in order to get high by assimilating the information the DMT is feeding them. This is the same process occurring within me as their knowledge infuses itself into me, getting me high with the same data transmitted in a different dimension and state. To put it quite blatantly, it is a spiritual mind orgy of energy. The perceived negativity I felt lies within the fact that I knew they took more from me than they gave to me. When I was downloaded, I squirmed in my chair. I could feel an invisible force penetrate my body and my mind, and this force pulled my essence into a place which appeared higher and less dense than my own. They beamed me, probed me, and copied me, and yet I never left that chair. These events all occurred from an invisible force. There was no "beam me up, Scotty," computer-generated particles. It was all simultaneous without any visual sense of its presence. This experience was rapid because it was happening on the tail end of the peak of the experience. These beings knew they did not have much time, and I felt an urgency within their discourse. At the point I was squirming, I actually felt my body again. The peak was waning after the 5-minute mark, and I then rapidly descended back into my body as my consciousness began to fill out the various portions of it. I first felt my brain and its awareness of the current surroundings. This awareness then spread down into the centre of my body and proceeded toward my arms, then legs. I rapidly felt a descent back into current consciousness. There was no tunnel or white light or anything of that nature though. I was just simultaneously brought back to this dimensional state in the same simultaneous manner that I had left it. Intense distortions of space and time were present. No true hallucinations after this point were experienced though. In fact, the only true hallucinations I've ever had are under the effects of DMT. I've heard atropine or datura-based alkaloids can cause this, but these seem most accurately a delirium state, and not a true alternate dimensional plane. After about 5 to 10 minutes of experiencing what I would describe as a peak 1000 microgram acid type 100 milligram psilocybin combo trip, I was back to complete baseline. Now I could describe the effects outside of the peak, but they feel like any other tryptamine-based hallucinogen in high doses. My interest is in the extra-dimensional states which the consciousness seems to direct itself. If I were to look at myself from the DMT hyperdimensional state, I would be very disturbed. The trauma of entering the DMT plane is far less excruciating than leaving it. This is probably why many people who experience a sublime, heaven-like near-death state don't want to come back from it. Because after experiencing the most brilliant aspects of DMT hyperspace, this third-dimensional reality seems very primitive, traumatizing, and incredibly unnerving, given the atrocities the psyche knows exists within it. I feel like DMT is the reason I have sought out alternate dimensions in the first place. I find this current reality to be a very schizophrenic one. In this place, everything is chaotic, wrong, and wicked. Where the most corrupt and narcissistic individuals make the most money, rule the most territory, and control the greatest spiritual knowledge. Where religious and shamanic priests herd their subjects in perpetually mundane and spiritually fetal existence. And where finance governs the social interest of the masses while disregarding ethical integrity, all in the name of personal profiteering. Oh my god. I hate this place because I know that once I'm coming down from DMT, I'm back within my own selfish, corrupt, and decadent actions. The DMT shows me my deficiencies in a blatantly neutral and simple fashion. Much like its incredibly simple chemical compilation within the human mind, it tells me that I am part of what has created the very fabric of reality within which I occupy. Instinctually, I actually know this, but the DMT shows me this through providing me with nirvana and then letting me materialize back into this awful place. When I'm back here, I became part of the collective consciousness that is the human race. I look at the very state of this reality I've helped generate. The very place I occupy, I have collectively created with my fellow humans, and for this, I am deeply disappointed with myself and others. We have so much potential which has been circumvented by selfish interest. Humanity simply doesn't care about spirituality anymore. It doesn't want to have these experiences. It only wants what instantly impacts for its own physical gain. What this shows me is a warning to the Homo sapien species. This entity must learn to reconnect with itself with the organic, or it is doomed to self-destruction through artificially integrated expression. This artificial expression is the next step in evolution physically. What we will lose in the process is the very nature of our organic soul, if you will. It will be lost among implants, cybernetic grafts, and RFID integration. And this will all happen because of the ego and its persistence to revel in its own brilliance. My ultimate theory is that DMT is a transport molecule which periodically impacts a few individuals experiencing its profound revelations. Through it, I see who and what I really am. It gives me all the means by which to understand my higher spiritual self. It is integral to my being because it governs the very nature of my brain's impulses on a minute vibration. Humanity must realize the reality it occupies is nothing more than a conglomeration of individual consciousness expressing itself on a subjective basis. This is the beauty of DMT. What it has told me is that we are all one. It displays itself in plants, animals, and fungi to demonstrate it is all-pervasive and all-encompassing. This substance is the binding force which links all elements of this reality together. It shows me I am not the ultimate egocentric being that I think I am. I am just a piece of a greater cosmic brain. I am a thought within the singularity that is God. DMT is my ethereal connection to God, through a simplistic chemical transportation outlet. So, in summary, DMT is a portal into God consciousness, an etheric highway grid where conscious thought, ideas and wisdom freely traverses in order to better evolve the all-pervasive essence which is everything. This is the most simplistic and accurate depiction I have ever conceived when trying to attempt to understand who, what and where I am. This experience was so profound, I remember it cosmosecond by cosmosecond, like the instant I was born. The next closest memory I have is my first sexual encounter at 17 years old, which genuinely is quite fuzzy and only contains minute by minute bits and pieces. That is the very effect this experience had on me and my consciousness. I just started reading Rick Strassman's DMT, The Spirit Molecule. It's profound that Western science is starting to discover what I feel DMT has been telling me and guiding me towards since conception all along. This shows how the patrilineal religions which have destroyed and dominated Western beliefs and conscious expansion are beginning to disintegrate. Although I have to disagree with Rick Strassman in regards to referencing DMT as a spirit molecule, as from my experience it is not a spirit molecule. DMT is the transport molecule. The spirit is and always was there because it is all things in all dimensions simultaneously. DMT allows the subjective elements of spirit to enter physical form at roughly 49 days after conception. You and I are those subjective elements of the omnipresence which is all things. We come here to experience. At the moment of death, DMT allows for our part of spirit to leave this dimension and reintegrate with the collective whole. All of the memory, thoughts and life we lived are brought with the spirit as it adds to the God consciousness. This, my friends, this is evolution, not on a physical scale but on an etheric, spiritual one. This report is a tribute to what my most startling DMT trip created within my mind. It shook me so hard and swayed me so much. I know that DMT is the doorway to God. I theorize this is why so much of organized religion believes God is with us, around us, envelops us, and will always be with us, and is us. This is DMT, a portal or bridgeway from God to God, they to you, and I. We are all the subjective thoughts of the God singularity which pervades all matter, and DMT has shown me this. It's simply that God hasn't quite figured out how to integrate its subjective thoughts in order to link all of the various dimensions it occupies. DMT is a tool to help connect these places though, and this is what makes it what I refer to as a transport molecule, found within us, outside of us, and beyond us. I now know this reality is but a dream of the divine being from which my thoughts are registering in physical space. All of this is a complete and utter illusion. We collectively create this illusion and we create the very reality of the illusion within which we live. If I were to summarize everything I explained in this report, it would come down to this one sentence. You are the one you have been waiting for. You are everything that is, and always will, make possible.